and welcome back to the channel that's the home of the most timber-shivering adventure into Davy Jones' locker on YouTube, Zilog and Moto. Okay, yeah, that's a bit much even for me. To all those of you that are here for the first time, or those of you that are coming back for seconds, welcome. I'm glad you're here to participate in the festivities. What in the world am I talking about? Well, in all seriousness, Zilog and Moto is the YouTube channel that's dedicated to your host, myself, chronicling the collection of every English language game for the Sega Master System, Genesis/Mega Drive, Sega CD, and 32X. You see, the two main processors of the 8 and 16-bit Sega families of hardware are the Zilog Z80 and the Motorola 68000, hence Zilog and Moto. And since collecting games just for the purpose of putting them on a shelf to collect dust is frankly kinda lame, we are playing all of these bad boys, good, bad, or indifferent, and rating them on a 5-star scale. I try to upload one of these reviews every week because there's still a ton of games left to review, and I like to finish before my kids put me in an old folks home down the street. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in, I'd heartily recommend that you subscribe, and come on this journey with me. Certain genres of games that, for the most part, just work considerably better on the PC due to their interface than on consoles. One of those that usually feels more natural on a computer is the point-and-click adventure game. The first computer I ever owned was a Commodore 64 that I had inherited from my uncle, as he had moved on to a more powerful PC. With that Commodore 64, I had a whole big box of games that I really wish I still had, but sadly I sold all those about 20 years ago. A lot of those games were Infocom text adventures, stuff like the Enchanter Trilogy, Moon Mist, and the classic Leather Goddesses of Phobos. While there were no graphics to look at, I loved the puzzles and exploring all the environments, and usually the Infocom titles had a clever sense of humor as well. The text adventure genre would fade away with the advent of more powerful computers, but adventure games themselves wouldn't go away, they simply evolved to include graphics and the use of a mouse. Sierra Online, who was behind the Leisure Suit Larry and King's Quest series, work their way into the graphic adventures by still relying on a text parser to tell your character what to do once you'd use the mouse to move them into position. However, their main competitor, LucasArts, created an engine for all their games called Scum that instead had a different style of interface that gave you buttons to click on with instructions, meaning that you could play the game entirely with your mouse if you wanted to. One of the first games to utilize that engine was the original version of today's game, The Secret of Monkey Island, which appeared in various forms on DOS and other home computer platforms in the early 90s. The Secret of Monkey Island was extremely popular for good reason, and would eventually see 4 sequels over the next 20 years, culminating in HD remakes of the first 2 games in 2010. Until those last releases, the series was primarily exclusive to home computers, but there is the occasional exception, like Escape from Monkey Island appearing on the PlayStation 2. However, the series' initial foray into the console versions was the version of the original Secret of Monkey Island for Sega CD, released in November of 1993. But as we've seen with several Sega CD games in the past, the Sega CD is not a DOS PC. Does the Secret of Monkey Island do a better job of running on the Sega CD hardware than those other games? Or does it have the same issues that we've seen on the PC ports in the past? Well, we'll take a look at all that and more, but first, a look at the package. And here's my copy of The Secret of Monkey Island. As you can immediately see, this copy has seen better days, but with as rare as the original cardboard boxes can be for first-run Sega CD games, I'm okay with them not being perfect, just intact. And the plastic case I keep this in helps it maintain its shape. As you can tell by looking at the sides, this one got stepped on or otherwise crushed at some point. But other than some edge wear and corner wear on the sides, I think this copy has held up pretty well, especially the artwork on the front and back that doesn't appear to have any kind of sun or water damage. Briefly, I should mention that Limited Run Games did re-release for this in regular and special edition, and while I appreciate them releasing new copies of the game, especially since this original version is as hard to find as it is right now, I don't like the aesthetics of it. I totally get what they were doing, putting it in a large-style jewel case like newer Sega CD releases, so it would be more durable, and then also giving it a slightly different look so there would be no confusing it with the original release. But for me, this original version is where it's at, as this box art is more in line with the PC version, And that's just a classic cover with some stellar artwork. I don't want to spoil too much, but once you've played the game, you'll be able to pick out some nice, small details relating back to stuff that happens in the game. One other quick note on the cover, you'll see that on this version of the game, there's no mention of LucasArts anywhere, and instead there's a pretty prominent JVC logo. That's because at the time, LucasArts had to deal with JVC to handle their console releases for both Sega and Nintendo, including the well-renowned Super Star Wars trilogy on Super Nintendo. Flipping over the back, it appears they took advantage of the fact that there's more real estate to work with on these Sega CD boxes, as there's 6 nice quality screenshots from the game, each from different segments of the game. Since there's more room to work with, I would have liked them to be a little bit bigger, especially because the text in them is a bit hard to read, but that's nitpicking a bit. Speaking of hard to read text though, holy crap, all the flavor text in the back and the picture captions are tiny. They're readable, but I don't know, maybe they could have made the captions less wordy to use a bigger font? Seeing this reminded me that I'd seen this before on a Sega CD game, and sure enough, the rear cover of The Adventures of Willie Beamish has this same issue. So I'm assuming publishers just didn't care about ruining their customers' eyesight in the early 90s. I mean, come on. I like the small details like the skull and crossbones bullet points down toward the bottom, but why so small? Graphic design issues aside, the flavor text is solid and does a good job of getting the feeling of the game across. Inside the box you get a standard jewel case with a Secret of Monkey Island CD, and surprisingly a sparse game manual. You can just see how thin it is, and that's with about 3 blank pages for notes at the end. Granted, unless you're going to include a lot of backstory or other bonus elements, there's not a ton to describe in a point-and-click adventure, especially since you can theoretically play through the entirety of the game just using the A button, although I wouldn't recommend it. However, that does lead to one of the stranger things I noticed in the manual. The section that describes the controller is labeled Names of Controller Parts. I mean, yeah, that's technically correct, but what an awkward way to refer to the button layout. The Building Sentences section is a disaster as well, with just way too wordy, and again, technically correct, but it just feels like this was all written by someone who's never played a video game before. Well, at least the game itself is good, right? Right? Let's get to the review, shall we? In the late 80s and early 90s, Sierra Online and LucasArts were considered the kings of the point-and-click genre, with each company pushing each other to create better and better games, until both companies released what I think are the gold standards for the genre in 1996-97, with Sierra releasing Leisure Suit Larry Love for Sale, and LucasArts releasing The Curse of Monkey Island. And I can already hear those of you out there, Leisure Suit Larry, ew, or what about Grim Fandango and Full Throttle? Well, first off, I did say it was what I thought. You're free to think something else. But in my defense, Love for Sale is tame by 2021 standards and has some brilliant touches like the Where's Dildo minigame, the scratch and sniff card, the limited use text parser, and being able to insert yourself into the game by adding a picture and recording WAV files. And as far as Grim Fandango and Full Throttle go, Full Throttle is not as good as you think it is, and Grim Fandango, as great as it is, controls very awkwardly and coincidentally causes Escape from Monkey Island to be my least played of the 5 games in the series because it shares that same game engine and is just a pain to deal with. While Sierra Online started out creating adventure games from their inception in 1979, LucasArts didn't follow suit until 1986, but they made up for lost time pretty quickly with the aforementioned Scum engine and highly entertaining, humorous escapades for the player. Some of those games used existing properties like Sam & Max and Indiana Jones, and others were wholly new creations like the Maniac Mansion Day of the Tentacle series, and today's entry in the Monkey Island series, which originally arrived on PC in amazing 16-color EGA on floppy disks in October of 1990, before quickly getting a proper 256-color VGA version right before Christmas, but still on floppy. And as was common at the time, with the burgeoning multimedia revolution on home computers, The Secret of Monkey Island got a CD-ROM re-release with all new sound and a new streamlined version of the SCUM interface in 1992. This CD-ROM re-release is important, as it forms the basis of the Sega CD version, which would appear about a year later, arriving on the market just in time for Christmas in 1993. However, I'd hesitate to call it a direct port for a few reasons. While the game runs in a similar low resolution to the DOS version, giving it a very similar look, keep in mind that the Sega CD maintains the same 64 color on-screen limit from the Genesis, so the Sega CD version appears slightly washed out compared to the VGA edition. However, I want to stress that slightly in the previous sentence, because honestly, it looks pretty damn good despite a vast difference in hardware capabilities between the 486s and initial Pentiums powering home computers at the time. It certainly fares much better than what we saw previously with The Adventures of Willie Beamish that I reviewed in episode 60. However, while the game looks pretty good at a standstill, issues start to creep up when there's motion on the screen. The frame rate whenever a Guybrush is moving around is dependent upon whatever else might be on screen at the same time. If it's just Guybrush walking to and fro, then things look about how they're supposed to. But as soon as that's combined with any other action in the background or from other characters, frame rates will drop into the single digits, making the game appear to animate in slow motion. Certain scenes in particular are painful to watch, such as anytime Guybrush moves from one room to another in the SCUM bar, and this is with one of the more memorable elements of the SCUM bar, the pirates spinning on the chandelier as you walk in, completely removed, replaced with a boring, non-moving, pirateless chandelier. It's not the worst thing in the world, and it's not like the Monkey Island games are really known for their fast-paced action, but it does remind you that you're not playing the PC version. The graphics aren't the only place where you can tell the game is running on less powerful hardware, as the game's sound suffers a bit as well. You might be thinking, well, it's all running off of CD audio, same as the PC version. How can it be any worse? And you'd be correct to a point. The background music and sound effects appear to be largely the same, and when the game is actually producing sound, it does sound good, especially with certain Caribbean-inspired background music tracks that the series is known for. The problem is, there's lots of areas of the game that are silent. As in, no music, no sound effects, nothing. I went back and played the DOS version a bit, and there are similar areas in the original, but it seems like the Sega CD version has more of them. The only reason I can think of as to why it would be like this ties into the next technical issue with the game, and that's the load times. Anyone that's played anything on a Sega CD is probably familiar with the biggest drawback of the console, and that's the amount of time spent waiting on the console to load more data from the CD-ROM drive. With the Sega CD only having a single-speed CD-ROM, there are distinct pauses anytime the game data has to be read into memory from the disc. And this happens a lot. My guess is that some of the game's music and sound was cut to prevent some of the load times that the player experiences, and increase performance, similar to the chandelier pirates I mentioned earlier. Other than the odd lack of sound in some places, I actually didn't mind the load times too much, which usually present themselves when moving from one location to another in the game. And I thought that was interesting, because the main complaint about the game online is the loading times. Maybe I'm just more patient than others, or maybe I just remember loading games onto a Commodore 64 from a 1541 disk drive. As far as loading time complaints go, there is one place in the game that almost seems broken, and as far as I can tell, it's directly related to loading times, although I'm not sure why. One of the things the series is known for is a thing called insult sword fighting. This is a game mechanic that originated in the first game, but also appeared in Curse of Monkey Island, and had a variation called Monkey Combat that appeared in Escape from Monkey Island. The concept is, Guybrush will get into a sword fight with an opponent, but since this is a point-and-click adventure and not an action game, you don't physically control the fight. Instead, you trade insults with your opponent, and each insult has a matching snappy response. If you or the computer don't give the proper response to an insult, that person will lose ground and will eventually have to yield if too many incorrect responses are given.
I actually like this game mechanic a lot, and it provided some of the more memorable lines in the game. And I don't think I'm alone in this opinion with it being included in the aforementioned other games in the series. There's just one problem with regards to the Sega CD version. The way insult sword fighting goes is that you have to hear the insults and then learn their proper responses from computer opponents as you fight them. The game features 16 insults in total, so as you can imagine, your list of dialogue choices gets to be pretty long by the time you're ready to take on Swordmaster Carla. For some reason, rather than storing all these in memory, the Sega CD appears to have to load them off the disc. What this means is that the longer your list of choices gets, the slower the game is to respond when trying to press up or down on the controller to make your choice. At first, I was wondering if this was a controller issue, so I switched from my wireless Retrobit controller to a wired 6 button, and then to a wired 3 button, and they all exhibited the same problem. I even opened up my copy of Wacky Worlds and got out my Mega Mouse to try, because Sega Retro indicated that it might work, even though it's not mentioned anywhere in the manual, and that failed as well. I eventually figured out that the best way to get through the menu was to double tap in the direction you wanted to go, but even that is awkward at best, and ruins one of the game's signature features. Believe it or not, I've got one more issue with the port of the game that I have to discuss, and that's the save system. Save game features in home computer-based games are almost always more convenient, just due to their nature. But with the advent of the Sega CD and the next 32-bit generation of consoles, save games were moving away from archaic password-based systems to some form of presence on flash storage. The Sega CD itself has two places to store save game information, either locally in the Sega CD itself, or on what's now a pretty sought-after Sega CD RAM cart that plugs into the cartridge slot on the Genesis. There's just one problem. The developers who ported the game to the Sega CD decided not to utilize either of the Sega CD's flash storage capabilities, and since you can't save games to a CD-ROM, that leaves us with passwords. I'll pause temporarily for all of you to bang your head against the wall. The codes are very simple 4-digit PIN codes, which is nice, but they're more of a generic representation of where you are in the game, so when restarting from one, you may not come back in the same location or even have all the same items you were carrying. It technically works, but it's pretty sloppy and makes you want to avoid restoring your game if at all possible, which is a problem since this is probably an 8-hour game, give or take, based on your playing style. So I feel like I've spent all review crapping all over the game, and that's unfortunate, as it's freaking Secret of Monkey Island, one of the all-time great point-and-click adventures. Yes, it's not quite as good as the PC version, but considering it's running on a Sega CD, it shouldn't be. There's scenes in this game, such as when you get into a massive off-screen brawl with the sheriff when trying to steal the idol, that are just iconic, and I was excited to get to that portion recording the footage just so I could see it again. And then of course there's all the passive-aggressive notes you find on Monkey Island, the cannibals that don't want to eat you because they're worried about their cholesterol, Stan's amazing multicolored jacket. I could go on and on. It's simply a great game, and if you've never played it, you owe it to yourself to check it out in some format. If I was reviewing the original PC CD-ROM version, I'd give it 4 stars. But since this is the Sega CD version and it has all the idiosyncrasies that I mentioned above, I'm going to give it 3. While it has some issues, it shouldn't be ignored that this game was running on a game console and not a PC, and just the fact that it's as good as it is quite impressive.
Okay, that was The Secret of Monkey Island for Sega CD. If you've never played The Secret of Monkey Island, and it's 2021 as of the recording of this video, I strongly recommend you check out the Enhanced Special Edition that was released for modern consoles and PC. I picked up all 5 games in the series from GOG.com earlier this year when they were on sale, and it was money well spent. The Sega CD version isn't going to be for everyone, but I do like where it stands historically, amongst similar titles. Next week on Zilog and Moto, it's back to the Genesis, and we'll probably spend a lot of time on the Genesis/Mega Drive the rest of the year to fill out the schedule, some of which is already filled in via sequels, and some of which I've still got to figure out. Recently, combat sports have been in the news a bit, and sometimes for not good reasons, such as Evander Holyfield deciding to get in the ring at 58 years old. So I saw a game on the shelf that made me think about when the strangest thing about a boxing match on television would be the inclusion of a guy named Butterbean. Please remember to subscribe if you like this video, and remember, whatever you like to play, have fun, and be excellent to each other. Later.